Well, good afternoon out there, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. We've got a really great presentation for you, and I'm excited that you're here. We are going to be talking about something you're probably already familiar with or growing some familiarity around, and that's the Corporate Transparency Act. Before we get started, just our usual housekeeping. There's a menu somewhere on your screen, depending on the device that you're on or how you've logged in. It could be on the side of your screen, it could be below. There is a place for you to put in questions in there. It might be an icon that looks like a speech bubble. We also have handouts that are available. Those are the slides from this presentation. You can download those and share them or look back at them at a later time. We will be using polls throughout the webinar to get your perspectives and to provide some context. We will be recording this and sharing it after the fact, and we'll send out information on how to access that for your own use and to share with people that weren't able to be here today. My name is Greg Smith. I am the Director of Learning and Development here at Associa, and I'm so excited to welcome John Krieger, and that's pronounced Krieger, right? I want to be very particular. John Krieger, who is the Vice President of Government Affairs at Associa. John's been in government affairs for a long time. He's been at Associa for a number of years and has worked with governments across North America. John is very well respected in the community association industry and is an award winner through Community Associations Institute, serving on several task forces, panels. John hits the road on a regular basis, working directly with state and federal legislature. So, John, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Greg, and welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. My journey with the Corporate Transparency Act began, I believe, a year ago in September, as we kind of saw this coming on board, becoming effective. That you'll hear us talk about that you need to be concerned about is January 1st of 2025. So we'll get rolling into this, Greg, if you're ready.
Yeah, let's just.
As he said, it's my honor and pleasure to represent.
Yeah, John, I'm having some audio issues here. It might be on my end. I apologize for that. But today's session, we're going to be discussing what's called the Corporate Transparency Act, or CTA, as it's referred to. This is going to directly impact community associations and board members. We're going to provide some specific information on the law's requirements, who it applies to, the process for complying, and the penalties for non-compliance. So, John, I'm just going to check. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you okay.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
I can. Great. So hopefully at the end of the session today, if you all are not familiar with the Corporate Transparency Act, you'll understand how it's going to apply to you and how you can ensure your community's compliance. And before we jump in, I just want to make sure you understand that nothing that we offer here today is legal advice. Neither John or I are attorneys, and even if so, we are not your association's attorney. So we're going to provide you some context and some education, but it's going to be really important for specific advice about your community. You're going to want to reach out to the association's attorney. If you don't have one, connect with one in your local area. Before we get started, let's launch our first poll here because we're curious what you all are familiar with out there. How familiar are you with the Corporate Transparency Act, or CTA? So the poll is up. Just a little bit familiar, not at all familiar, or very familiar. What's your level of familiarity with the CTA? John, as you're having conversations with board members and managers as you tour around the country, what seems to be the level of knowledge about the CTA before you start?
A lot of people are familiar with what it is. I think when you drill down to, who does it apply to and how do you comply, I think that's where there's some uneasiness or maybe lack of understanding. But a lot of people in this industry are aware of Corporate Transparency Act.
Okay. All right, let's take a look at these results. Yeah, about 2/3 not at all familiar with CTA, and about 1/3 somewhat familiar, 5 very familiar. So we've got a lot of great information for you today. John, I'll go ahead and ask you, the first question here is, what is it? What is the CTA? What is the CTA trying to accomplish?
Yeah, I think that's a good place to start, Greg. And I won't spend a lot of time, but I always find it's important when you look at laws, what's the context? What's the intent? And so I'll take a couple minutes here to kind of jump in that. As you said, the Corporate Transparency Act, or as we'll refer to, the CTA, it was enacted by Congress as part of the Anti-Money Laundering Act in 2021. And this was all part of an effort by Congress to update our laws to help combat money laundering, financial fraud, and terrorism financing. And it's also intended really as an effort by our country to kind of catch up to similar information that's been collected by European countries, European Union countries, I believe since 2017. Now, the CTA is administered by FinCEN, which stands for the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. And FinCEN is a bureau of the U.S. Department of Treasury, and it was established in 1990. And its mission, kind of the way this act is, its mission is to safeguard our country's financial system. So for you board members or others on the call, listening to that, I'm sure you're thinking, how does this apply to our association? I mean, most associations, sadly, often struggle just to pay their bills. So how in the world would they be able to launder money or finance global terrorism? So again, the question is, why are associations covered under this law? And the simplest way, and I'm not defending it, I'm just going to say the simplest way to explain that is the CTA isn't targeting associations specifically, but associations are just caught up in the desire by the government to get a better understanding of who owns businesses or are the decision makers for businesses around the country. Again, the goal of the CTA is to increase access by the government and law enforcement to contact information of the owners and operators of businesses in this country. And by doing so, it's trying to prevent what sometimes happens in certain states or businesses as they form. They try to mask ownership through shell companies or other legal means, which have proven to cause delays and hurdles for criminal and civil investigations into alleged illegal financial activities. And we'll kind of talk more about what the efforts of our industry to kind of seek exemptions, because like I said, we're not hotbeds for terrorist financing in those kind of financial misfeasance. So we feel that this law is unfairly directed at us.
Yeah. John, let's talk a little bit about who this impacts. Who are the people that need to be concerned, and kind of what are some of the things they're going to need to do as a result?
No, that's a great next step, because I mean, ultimately, I'm sure the people on this call, that's what they're trying to figure out. And so we'll kind of start by answering that by examining who is required to comply and what information is required. So first, the who. And there's really there is three specific entities now. It's reporting companies, it is company applicants, and beneficial owners, as you see by that slide. And I'll kind of go into a little more detail here. Reporting companies are the corporations, limited liability companies, partnerships, or really any domestic company created by filing a document of incorporation with a Secretary of State or any similar office. So for our purposes, obviously, most, if not almost all, community associations are formed by filing articles of incorporation, often with their state's Secretary of State's office or a similar agency. And so again, this act applies to a broad range of companies and entities, but I'm going to focus on community associations for our discussion today. And so for those on the call who maybe aren't board members, this also may apply to your company or employer. That's really up to, in the end, your legal counsel to determine. And I'll also make a note that there are some slight variations in this act for the requirements if the reporting company is foreign owned, but obviously for our purposes, I'm going to focus on domestic companies. So with that said, I'm going to talk about some exemptions in the law. First big exemption is for larger businesses, and that includes associations. Again, any domestic or U.S. domiciled company with 20 employees or more and at least $5 million in annual receipts or sales are exempt right off the top. So this is really applying to, meant to apply to smaller businesses and companies. Second, Congress also specifically exempted 23 types of smaller entities that are subject to other significant regulatory regimes. Again, for our purposes, the only real relevant exemptions are one for unincorporated associations. Again, those that haven't filed articles of corporation with government. And then the other exemption for our purposes is for any association qualified as tax exempt under Section 501C of the federal IRS code. Again, I'm aware that there are some that may be, tax exempt organizations. Not a lot, but here again, double check with your CPA or your counsel if you feel you're exempt under those. Next, there's the second group here on the list is company applicants. Now that's a new requirement that went into effect on January 1st of this year. Company applicants are a person or persons, no more than two, who one, directly filed the documents that created the company and those articles of corporation, or are primarily responsible for directing or controlling the filing of the documents creating the association. So the next is really probably where we're going to spend a lot of time. It's once you determine that your association has to file, then the focus turns to beneficial owners. And that's a specific term with a specific definition. And I'll try to cover that really quickly. Again, the CTA requires beneficial owners to file specific information with FinCEN. And those beneficial owners are in any individual who directly or indirectly exercises substantial control over a reporting company or owns or controls at least 25% of the company. Now, going back to the first point, substantial control, we think that's going to apply to board members. But substantial control is also defined, and it's an individual who meets any of these four general criteria: is a senior officer in the organization, has authority to appoint or remove certain officers or a majority of directors, is then, and I put this in quotes because this is from the law, is an important decision maker, or has any other form of substantial control directly or indirectly over the reporting company. So, I mean, talking to attorneys, and again, I'm not an attorney, but most of them feel that any board member meets that qualification. There is an exception, and I'll raise this just in case there's any managers. There's an exception to beneficial owner if that person is an agent or acting on behalf of a beneficial owner. So my understanding, again, talking to attorneys, that would exempt community association. So hopefully you're understanding who this applies to. Then the next thing I want to talk about is what information is required first from the reporting company.
Now, John, before you go there, just for clarity, most associations, in my experience, tend to be incorporated, and they tend to be not for profit, but they're not 501c corporations, correct? So unless you are a 501c or unincorporated association, the CTA applies to you. And I think the government has been very clear about that.
They have, and we'll talk about that further. Yes, you have that right, Greg.
Yeah, and I understand there's a little bit of a delay in slides, and the handouts actually have more information than we're displaying on screen. So if you see a little bit of a discrepancy, that might be what it is. So I'll go to your next question there, John, was what are we going to need to provide? What are the reporting companies and the beneficial owners going to need to provide to FinCEN?
Yeah, let's start with the reporting companies, which again would be the association. So they're going to need, as the slide shows, the full legal name of the entity, or a trade name, which is, if you're doing business as another name. Sometimes associations might incorporate as one name, but do business as another name. the current complete street address of the principal place of business, the state it's located, and then either an IRS and then an IRS taxpayer identification number, which can be an employer identification number.
Okay.
That's what's required of of reporting companies.
Okay.
There's also, I think, the next slide that is specific information required from beneficial owners. Here again, the board members. And we'll refer to this as BOI. That's the way the Act refers to it. So beneficial owners, each board member is going to have to provide their full legal name, their date of birth, their current complete residential address, a unique identifying number and issuing jurisdiction, which is, that's either state or local ID, a driver's license, or a U.S. passport. And then this is important. The board members has to upload the image of that document to FinCEN's website. Upon completion of that, FinCEN will issue a unique identifying number, which is called FinCEN ID, to the beneficial owner, which will then be used to complete the registration for the reporting company. I want to make an important note. It is not required for someone to get a FinCEN ID, but you have to provide that information. But getting that ID, and we'll talk about this later, having that ID will make filing of the report that's required of the reporting company. It just makes that easy. So again, as I mentioned, the final step of reporting after the reporting company provides their information, board member provides their information either up front and receives a FinCEN ID or as part of the report. The final step is for the reporting company to submit what's called a beneficial ownership information report. And again, that's we'll talk about this later, but that's done through FinCEN's e-filing system, and it can be done online or by submitting a PDF of the information.
Okay.
So
John,
that's a lot.
Yeah, we got a couple of participants saying that their association doesn't have a mailing address or a place of business. I mean, might we be in the situation where we have to select the president's address, or what? Maybe this is a question for the association's attorney.
A question for the association's attorney. I'm going to say that I have seen some attorneys say you can use the management company's address if you have hired a management company. I'm not going to verify that because I've not seen that where in the materials from FinCEN. But I think again that's where probably need to go to the attorney, or FinCEN has you can contact FinCEN to get that.
And then, do board members need to provide this information directly, or can this be done on their behalf by a management company or somebody else?
It can, and we'll talk about those options at the end. There are third parties that are willing to assist by helping board members get their FinCEN ID, or by collecting that information, going ahead and submitting that and getting the FinCEN ID to complete the report. So yes, there are companies out there that will do that if a board member does not want to go on FinCEN's website to do it themselves.
And so, some people are maybe starting to be a little bit concerned about providing this information. So can we talk a little bit about how the government plans to protect this privileged, private, sensitive information about individuals?
Absolutely. And I was remiss, Greg, let me just cover one other point. I've received questions on people going, okay, this report, is this required annually? When is this required? And so I'll just answer that up front. It is required, just initial report filed with FinCEN, and then every time there's an update or correction, the association has to update that information. But until that happens, it's a one-time filing.
Okay. So assuming we have board members changing over on an annual basis, the community will be doing this on it, just whenever that information changes.
Correct. I mean, that to me, I don't see associations moving. So I think, anytime there's a change in beneficial owner or beneficial owner information, then yes, that has to be filed with FinCEN. So
And
getting to
then,
your next,
sorry,
yeah,
for clarity, acronym clarity, FinCEN is Financial Crimes Enforcement Network.
correct.
Okay,
That's
FinCEN,
the,
FINCEN.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, now getting to your question on security, obviously there's concern with, a board member submitting their private information and for good reason. FinCEN has prioritized confidentiality and security. And so because this information is, sensitive, so they impose very strict, confidentiality and security restrictions on the storage, access, and use of BOI. I could give some acronyms on, what they're using, the cloud-based, security, but just, trust me, that this is a high priority to them. And there's significant number of rules on, like I say, the storage, access, and use. Now, I'll cover a little bit of that on who can access this information. And right now it's 6 categories. It's the federal government agencies, it's state, local, and tribal law enforcement agencies, foreign requesters under certain conditions coming through our government, again, for criminal investigations, some financial institutions subject to customer due diligence requirements, federal regulators, and Treasury personnel. Again, that probably sounds like a lot, but it's really government-based, and it is, there are specific rules on how this information requested, how it gets approved, and that, I think you'll understand, when it comes to the uses. Again, I won't bore you with a lot of details.
And
But
there is more detail in the handouts for people to look at later.
Yeah. I think importantly, what I will say, and we've looked at this, this information is not, even though it's a government database, it is not subject to the generic freedom of information requests that government gets all the time for government information. It is not public information. This really is a law enforcement-based database to help in criminal investigations for financial crimes. And because of that, there are penalties for any authorized disclosure of the BOI. That's $500 per day for a violation, a fine of not more than $250,000, or imprisonment for up to 5 years, or both. And then there's enhanced penalties of up to $500,000 and or imprisonment up to 10 years if a person commits this violation while violating another law. So again, I hope this puts you at, the attendees here at a little bit of a little more at ease, that the government really understands, hey, this is your private information. And I'll tell you, Europe, as I mentioned early on, Europe has been collecting this information since, I believe, 2017, and until 2022 court ruling, they had this database as publicly available.
Wow.
So, at least Congress understood, hey, our folks are going to be concerned, and so they put these controls in place.
John, can you clarify again the date for filing of this information?
Yeah, the deadline for this, and we'll repeat this a lot, the deadline for compliance for filing this information is January 1st, 2025 for companies that have been in, for associations or companies that have been in operation prior to January 1st, 2024. Now, any association, if anybody on this call, if your association was incorporated after January 1st, 2024, you actually have 90 days after to comply. So
after incorporation.
Yeah, if there's anybody on this call that your association was incorporated after January 1st of this year, again, I would get with legal counsel to make sure you meet those deadlines.
Okay. Anything else you want to cover here, John, on any of these topics before we kind of move into what's next or what the next steps are?
Yeah, well, I think I've covered. I think I've covered the penalties. I think next we'll kind of get into the following requirements and maybe repeat some of what I just said, but in a more.
Yeah, so I'm going to assume most of the folks on this webinar are going to be affected by the CTA. So what is it that they need to do to comply?
Okay, I mean, it starts with where. Like I said earlier, FinCEN has designed and built a secure web-based platform for collecting and securing the beneficial owner information and the beneficial owner information reports. And that database is, well, and that's all located at FinCEN's website, which is www.fincen, again, FINCEN.gov/BOI. So it all starts there. And
John,
that
before
website has
we get too deep, I am curious to see if any of the folks, kind of based on your comment a little bit ago, if any of the participants on this webinar have actually filed already. So can I launch a poll here?
Yeah.
Have you or your association already filed with FinCEN, either yes or no, or you're not sure? I might anticipate a lot of people are going to say no, but I think this would be helpful to know. Again, John, as you're about the country talking about FinCEN, are you finding a lot of board members or associations have filed or have not filed yet?
I'm finding a lot have not, for the very reason we talked about, because if any of that information changed, say they were doing a board election in September, and they're going to have a change of board members, then they would have to file an update. So I think a lot of associations are kind of waiting, in my experience, are kind of waiting till Q4 to say, okay, let's limit the amount of updates we have to file by filing once, closer to the deadline, and then, as needed going forward. So
Yeah.
I think people are kind of holding off and still learning what the
requirements. And that's largely the case here. Vast majority of attendees here have not filed. Okay. All right. So
we have 2% that have done their homework. Congratulations.
Yeah. So what are they going to need to do? So here's the information, and I'll go ahead and put it all up just because of the delay. How do they file, John?
Yeah, like I said, it starts at FinCEN's website, and that website has a lot of instructional documents and questions and answers. So again, it's up there, FinCEN, www.fincen.gov/BOI. Make sure you see it's a BOI, not an L. So again, beneficial owners, it usually starts by them submitting their personal information and receiving an identification number, that FinCEN ID, and that is then used to register the reporting company, in this case, the community association. Like I said earlier, the act went into effect for January 1st, 2024. And so like I said, any entities created or registered after January 1st of this year, they have 90 days in which to file their information with FinCEN. So again, if you're a new association that was incorporated this year, please, get on that. For those entities and associations created prior to January 1st of 2024, again, they have until January 1st of next year to file. And then, just to cover it all, any associations created after January 1st, 2025, they will have 30 days to file with FinCEN. Yeah, and then talking about the changes, any entities who have filed their information, any changes or corrections, they must report those to to FinCEN within 30 days.
John, reporting company, is that the name of the association? Is that a management company? Who is the reporting company?
Well, in this case, it could be both. If you're a smaller management company and you don't meet any of the exemptions or the overall exemption for larger companies with 20 or more employees or $5 million or more in annual sales, this would also apply to them. But I think, for this, I'm presuming most people are board members or members of associations, so we're kind of focused on the association. But really, the reporting companies are any company domiciled in it's been incorporated in the U.S. that does not meet either the list of 23 exemptions or the large company exemption. They are required to file. Okay. And the important thing to note here too is the penalties are pretty severe. It's a fines of up to $500 per day, or criminal penalties of up to 2 years of in prison or a fine of up to $10,000. In addition, a person may be subject to civil and or criminal penalties for willfully causing a company not to file its BOI or to report incomplete or false information. An interesting note here, and it's here on the slide. Just again, as I'm out talking to folks and certainly talking with attorneys, some associations, because this is such a significant penalty, some associations are, on advice of their legal counsel, have updated their governing documents to require anyone serving or running for the board to comply with CTA, the filing of that beneficial owner information. Because what you don't want to have happen is a board member say, I'm not doing it. Well, if they don't, their association won't be in compliance and subject to those penalties. So it's, again, I'm not recommending that. I'm not suggesting it. I'm just saying that is a practice that I'm hearing out there, that they're making complying with CTA a prerequisite for service on the board.
John, just a couple of clarifying points, because we're getting multiple questions around who files. If one board member files, is that sufficient for the association, or does every board member need to file this information?
Here again, to me, that treads on a legal question. I'm not going to give them advice, but I'm going to say, just based on the information, the requirement does not say only one beneficial owner has to file for the company. This
So
applies
any director, as we understand it, is a beneficial
with substantial control over the association. Yeah, so I have heard the practices. It is all board members need to do that if they all exercise control or make decisions for the association.
Okay. All right, I had another question here. Give me 1 second. All right, we'll come back to that. So yeah, there's a lot of concern out there. You've heard that, John, in your travels around the country and your conversations around the country. Can you talk a little bit about what the industry is doing to maybe provide some relief to this? You referenced it a little bit, but can you get in a little more detail? How are we approaching this as an industry?
Yeah, in multiple fronts, and I've been part of some of that. You may have seen, well, it started with lobbying beginning last fall. Like I said back, I think this was October. I was in DC with our industry, CAI, Community Associations Institute, and we were doing our lobby day on the Hill. And this is one of the issues we were talking to members of Congress and their staff about. Kind of like I mentioned earlier, we're set up as nonprofits. We're not in the business of money. We're not set up to be laundering money. We're certainly not terrorist financing. So we're trying to make the case this clearly isn't meant to target us, because we're not part of this. And so we were advocating for a delay or an exemption or repeal. And I'll tell you, we weren't getting a lot of sympathy. I know CAI representatives have met personally with and sent a letter to officials at FinCEN requesting some of these changes. And, unfortunately, I saw in April, FinCEN actually released a bulletin explicitly stating that community associations would not be exempt.
Probably in response to a lot of our lobbying efforts, right?
Yeah, I think so. So that those conversations are still happening. Now on legislation, there have been some legislative activity. Bills introduced in Congress, again, some of them would delay implementation a year. Some of them were meant to repeal the CTA altogether. Some of them actually have language to specifically exempt community associations from the act. While there's been some movement in one Congress or one House or the other, any of you students of civics know, until the same bill passes both houses of Congress and are signed by the president, it doesn't have the force of law. So what we're finding is the House seems to be a little more amenable to this. In the Senate, with the 51-49, not to be partisan, but the Democrats really have no interest in changing this. And really what we heard back from a lot of them were, oh, this isn't very burdensome. It's not very difficult. Congress doesn't need to act on this. So again, probably nothing going to happen this year. But next year's next year, this being an election year, chambers of the House could flip, new members elected. We're going to have a new president. I'm sure this effort will still continue next year, but that doesn't interfere with that January 1st, 2025 deadline. So that's lobbying and legislation. The last area is the courts. Any of you following this, which if you are, God bless you, a federal court in Alabama actually ruled that the CTA was unconstitutional, but that verdict only applied to the members of the plaintiffs group, which was the National Small Business Association, approximately 60,000 members. Now, some conversation was, well, can't we join that group and be covered? Well, again, the verdict only applied to the members of that association at the time the lawsuit was filed. Since then, this case is actually pending before the U.S. Court of Appeals. The appeal by the federal government, oral arguments are set to be heard, I've seen late September. Again, I don't think there'll be a final ruling on that. Again, it won't apply, but it won't apply to associations. There's also been additional lawsuits. The Small Business Association of Michigan has filed a suit in Michigan. A businessman and a group of nonprofits have filed suit in federal court in Utah. And I will say, again, CAI, our trade group for our industry, Community Associations Institute, has drafted and is getting ready to file suit as well to try to get us exempted by ruling it unconstitutional. So again, it's not from a lack of effort, and I think not from a lack of making really good arguments of why this shouldn't apply to us, but everything I see, I don't see anything changing. I don't expect an injunction or a final court ruling before January 1st, 2025. And that's the date. If you haven't heard enough from me, that's the important date, because that's when the deadline is for associations that have been in operation prior to this year to to submit their.
John, we got one more poll, which I'm putting up here, and this is just asking participants out there, have you or anyone in your association contacted your member of Congress about CTA? Now, a lot of you didn't even have a lot of familiarity with this prior to today, but I'm just curious if any of you have. We're getting a few that say yes, because then John, I have a follow-up question about this.
And again, I know CAI has put out some calls to action, asking its members. So any of you that are a member of CAI may have seen that, may have responded to it. So it wouldn't surprise me if we had better numbers than those that even were familiar with CTA in general.
Yeah, let's close and take a look. Yeah, most people saying no, 79% no, they have not contacted. We have 4% that say yes, they have, and that might be through a CAI call to action, and quite a few people just aren't sure. So my follow-up question, John, is because people are concerned, because I think CAI agrees with the fact that HOA should be exempt, community associations should be exempt, that this is a lot to ask of volunteer board members. Those that are interested in reaching out to their member of Congress to ask for some sort of a legislative fix around CTA, what can they do? How can they do that?
Well, again, I mean, most I mean, the congressional website, I'm almost 100% certain. I know a lot of states do that. You can type in who is my member of Congress by putting your address, and it'll come up who's your representative and who are your senators. I would encourage folks to do that. And, it just takes a simple message of, hey, I'm a member or board member of an HOA. It's already a, challenging job for volunteer. This compliance makes me nervous about submitting my information. I would request you exempt us from the CTA. I'm a big believer, because I mean, that's what I do for a living. I've been in this government related work for 35 years. I believe in the people's voice, but I also would qualify folks. The chances of Congress taking any action before January 1st is, I don't want to say none, but it's slim to none, particularly because being an election year, Congress is anxious to adjourn and go out and campaign. And that's just a fact of life. You know, they want to be back and campaigning with their constituents. But if you see someone campaigning, if you want to send an email, I would encourage them, because your voice matters. It does.
Okay.
What
about maybe joining a CAI call to action or something? How can they do that?
If what?
Maybe about how do they join maybe an industry call to action? You mentioned that a little bit.
I believe they can access that on CAI's website. You probably know, Greg, what their website.
Yeah, caionline.org. And then search for corporate transparency.
I think under the advocacy tab there might be one, but I apologize. I get the email, so I haven't had to go on their website. But yeah, it's pretty easy. They have a good mechanism where you just click on it, and then you put in your address, and it automatically populates an email that you can send to your member of Congress.
So John, let's talk about,
like I said, even if it doesn't help this year, if there's action next year that then eliminates the need for associations to do their updates, that's some relief.
So John, let's talk about what's next, and then I want to cover a couple of questions. So next, they need to what by January 1st?
Yeah, again, by January 1st, go through those steps. If it does make it easy, if a board member goes in or works with someone to get that FinCEN ID, that makes it a lot easier, because then that just helps populate the report for the association. But they don't have to do that. And if this makes you nervous or worries you, like I said, there are third-party providers that you can Google to find out who might help you. Now, they're going to charge a fee for that. And I'll tell you, if you're a member or a client of Associa, for you, those of you who are clients of Associa, we do have a secure platform solution that tracks and allows for seamless registration and compliance. And so if your manager or our branch office hasn't reached out to you already, I'm sure they'll be in touch, or reach out to your manager to get that information. But again, first steps, confirm with counsel whether your association or company is required to comply by that 1/1/25 deadline, and if needed, work with a third party to make sure you meet that deadline.
Clarity on this web address, that should be a slash before BOI, right? Not a dot. FinCEN.gov/BOI.
Yes.
Okay.
You're right. We had
our mistake.
That's /BOI. Sorry about that.
All right. So let's go to questions here. We've got a few that we're getting pretty regularly. Is there going to be, to your knowledge, some sort of an audit system that the government will use to determine if each board member or beneficial owner has actually filed? Have you heard anything about this?
I have not heard what the enforcement will be, and whether they'll have, like you said, whether they'll have auditors that will start, pulling incorporated entities from the Secretary of State's office. I don't know. I've not heard any, and I've not seen in print any, discussion of that.
And BOI, so beneficial owner information. BOI. Correct. Right. So beneficial owner, and the CTA considers board members of community associations to be beneficial owners. So FinCEN.gov/BOI, and BOI is beneficial owner information. What about the penalties, John? Let's say 4 out of 5 of our board members agree, and they've gone online, and one of them refuses to do it. Who pays those penalties? Is that going to be the individual, or is that going to be the association? And maybe you're not sure about that too.
I'm not sure about that. I presume, since the entity is required to report ultimately, that those fines would come back on the association, and then that would be up to the association to determine, how they're going to assess that.
All right. Any other questions out there? We've got a lot. We're certainly going to have to follow up on a lot of these questions. Christy, is there anything else out there we should address? Okay. John, how about
again? I want to say, going back to your disclaimer, we can't. Lawyers are very sensitive to the unauthorized practice of law, and what that means is, in this, I can give you all the information that's out there. I can't really apply that information specifically to your case, to your association. So some of these questions, I'm just kind of setting expectations. We may not be able to provide answers because that would be illegal for
legal
us.
advice?
Depending, I haven't seen the questions, but if it's trying to apply the law to a specific circumstance with your association, that's going to be something that legal counsel will have to guidance and advice.
So, John, any I guess final encouragement maybe we can offer?
The encouragement I would say, I've not obviously done it. I'm not a beneficial owner, but having kind of looked through the website, having talked to some lawyers who have worked with their associations, it is not a burdensome from a task standpoint and a time standpoint to achieve this compliance. The website is, it's free. I don't know if I said that earlier. There's no charge by FinCEN to comply. They've set the website up pretty intuitively. It's not overly burdensome of what I've been told. And so I would say don't let this scare you, but I'll let it motivate you to make sure you comply by January 1st. That's kind of my takeaways here.
All right. Well, this has been a lot of information, certainly eye-opening, maybe a little scary to a lot of people. John, again, for clarity, Associate does have a platform that we are offering, will be offering, and board members can expect to hear about that from their local branch or company of Associate. Is that correct?
Correct. That is correct.
All right. Well, John, I really appreciate it. I know you've been on the front lines of this debacle, I guess, for a long time. You know more about this than most people. People in the industry are still navigating some of the ins and outs of this. Enforcement, we're not quite sure about. I'm sure more will become clear. We did get a lot of questions, and we will provide some information. Again, the recording of this will be available. You can watch it. You can share it. We will have the handouts available as well for download, for you to look at, for you to share with others. We'll have additional information coming from your associate management company or branch about this. And there's more to come. There may even be some, who knows, John, some legislative or regulatory developments. I know we're not too optimistic, but it's possible, right? So this is an ever-changing story, and we'll keep putting out information as we get it.
Yeah, I mean, again, reinforce, our industry continues to take the case that this is not intended for us. It should not be covered us. And, there could be some stroke of magic with the court providing an injunction. The lawsuit that we are filing, I've heard as of today, will either be by the end of the month or in September. And we've chosen, because of where CI's headquarters, that district court is, what I'm told, often does, provide rulings in a short period of time. But here again, I would encourage folks, don't wait till December to see if there'll be any relief from the courts. I would start making plans to either capture that information, get the FinCEN ID, and then work with, either doing it yourselves or work with your counsel on just making plans to not wait till the last minute. But we'll continue to advocate for exemption or delay, but then communicate that if anything does happen. But we'll see.
Okay. Well, again, we'll be sending out more information to you all as attendees of this webinar. And again, contact your local associate management company or branch for further information. But we'll see you on a future webinar. John, thank you so much for being here, and more to come about the CTA.